Hello! The lovely Yugopnik, Second Thought, and I have started a podcast together called The D Program. The upcoming episode is a spicy one about reform or revolution. I'm sure you'll love it. Please do go check it out if you haven't already. The links are in the pinned comment. A preface. Not every country mentioned today is some perfect utopia, nor am I trying to imply that every single defector ever is lying. I'm just trying to highlight the problematic aspects. Please use some critical thinking and don't insult your own intelligence by coming to stupid conclusions I don't draw in this video. With that said, introduction. The concept of the defector, we've all heard of it. A favorite trope of American cinema, something unrelentingly referred to when discussing a quote-unquote enemy country, used to describe how truly horrible it is over there, compared to our free and enlightened land. Defectors are usually a flavor of the month. Whoever the US is angry at this week usually determines the demographics. 40 years ago, it was Soviets and East Germans. In the lead up to the Iraq War, it was Iraqis, and nowadays it's a boring mix that alternates between North Koreans and, well, that's about it. The story usually goes like this. A citizen from a rogue country, oppressed by what is usually referred to as a regime rather than a more neutral word like administration, is forced to escape rather than emigrate to a country that is painted solely based on ideological sophistry, essentially claiming to value things like freedom rather than highlighting things that are more realistic incentives like, for example, economic opportunity. How about we add some nuance to this discussion? Definition. Language is important. The actual definition of a defector, according to Merriam-Webster, is to forsake one cause, party, or nation for another, often because of a change in ideology, with the example given being a former KGB agent who defected to America. Ideology really is everywhere. What else can you expect from a country that gave you collateral damage in the field of operations, which when translated into English, means dead civilians where we bombed? Words like regime and strongman, freedom, even democracy are so loaded as to become meaningless. Their use basically depends on who's doing the talking. To a lot around the world, the US is an anti-democratic regime with a horrible human rights record. Their political system, the party line, is dictated by oligarchs, while the regular people starve. Furthermore, people defect from capitalist countries, including the US, all the time. Every Haitian immigrant is in all actuality a defector by the logic of mainstream media. Same goes for the systematic depopulation of youth from Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and practically every other Eastern European country, whom attempt to find better opportunities in Western Europe. All defectors. Except they don't use that word, and that's intentional. But they're moving from a capitalist country to another capitalist country. No, not exactly. They're moving from a poor exploited country under no embargo or artificial restriction, generally, the capitalist system is an artificial restriction in and of itself for poor countries, to a much, much wealthier country. Parallels can be drawn. During the time of the USSR, across the Afghan, Iranian, and Turkish borders, it was patently clear which country was the more attractive one to live in. My own father, who lived and studied many years in the USSR, was amazed by the USSR and what it provided, but anecdotal evidence is no evidence at all, in my opinion. All this is an exercise to help show that there is an active and passive voice, that the use of particular terminology is trying to elicit certain images in your mind, basically telling you to think without telling you what to think, depending on the country, of course. Journalistic honesty is surprisingly fickle in our capitalist hellscape. Why do they do this? Now, this isn't to say that people have never defected for ideological reasons, that would be just silly. But there's a difference of presentation between defectors with a capital D and regular defectors. A lot of the time, those that defect are painted as undergoing a heroic struggle in their move, being wholly coated in ideological pain to further a particular motive of American NATO country foreign policy decisions. This is in stark contrast to the portrayal of Americans that defected to the Korean side during the Korean War, for example. Now, is there any truth to these modern tales of Homer, or is it simply all just theater? Before even touching on motives of those that leave their countries, why not discuss the things that they say themselves? Well, interestingly, here lies the difficulty. Defection stories have, for many years now, become a business. For example, the South Korean government offers massive sums of money, to the tune of $860,000 to defectors from North Korea, and celebrity defectors can make upwards of $12,500 per speech. This is actually a trope with defectors. West Germany, the US, South Korea all offered massive sums of money to people in order to have some propaganda tool. This at the very least makes defectors somewhat unreliable sources as a result of their major conflict of interest and incentive to fabricate different parts of their narratives. This is best illustrated by probably the most famous DPRK defector, Yeon-Mi Park. Park came from a wealthy family in the DPRK, herself being destined for med school and marrying into her level or higher, socially speaking, according to her mother. Park herself even claimed her mother walked around with Chanel bags and clothed imports from Japan. I wonder, does your mother walk around with Chanel bags and clothes imported from Japan? She further claims she saw public executions in stadiums at the age of 9 because someone watched the movie The Titanic or James Bond or some other Western movie. She changes her mind all the time. Other defectors have basically said she's lying. Andrei Lankov, a professor and leading authority on the DPRK, and definitely no fan of the DPRK, said, "I am very, very skeptical whether watching a Western movie would lead to an execution," based on his interviews of hundreds of defectors. In 2003, her father was arrested for fraud and illegal sale of state property, which she casually refers to as trading, and the details get murky from then on. He was sentenced for execution. No, he was sentenced to a year in prison. No, I got that wrong again. It was 10 years. Actually, it was 17. For such traumatic events, you'd think you'd be able to remember a number. She claims her mother, who took part in the illegal sale of state property alongside her husband, was investigated for a year via home discussions with detectives. I thought the DPRK was a monstrous country where people will shoot you for breathing weirdly, so it seems almost boringly benign that they investigate this matter in a way that isn't comically evil. Hold on, she realized that and changed her story to immediate year-long imprisonment. She claimed both her parents were imprisoned and her sister at 9 and 11 were left to fend for themselves, where they lived a Studio Ghibli existence in the woods, washing clothes in rivers and scavenging for food. In another interview, she claimed she lived with her uncle. At other times, she claimed she was starving and had to eat grass and insects to survive, but on a South Korean reality show she stars in, her mother claimed that never happened. In telling of her escape from North Korea, she repeats that she had to cross 3 or 4 or 5 mountains in the middle of the night at the border between China and the DPRK. The issue with that is, the place she lived and claimed to defect from, Hyesan, is right on the river that divides the two countries, and there are no mountains to cross. In one place, she claims she defected with her mother, father, and herself. In another interview, she claims it was only her and her mom. When her father passed in China, she claimed she had to bury him alone in the mountains in the dead of night. Her mother says they paid people to bury the body. In another place, she claims his body was cremated. She claimed she was detained in Mongolia for months and forced into daily stripping by sadistic guards. In another, she makes no mention of this and instead complains that she had to clean the detention center she was in. South Korean authorities, too, deny that she was ever forced into forced daily stripping, as South Korea has counselors in those detention centers to help defectors. This isn't even the beginning. She claims owning a Bible is illegal, which is absolutely not true. She claims North Korean citizens, who are apparently still in the throes of a mid-90s level famine, have to get off of carts to push trains themselves. How a malnourished person pushes dozens of tons of iron and steel is beyond me. There's generally so much more that is either completely ridiculous or that she's clearly lying about, either by omission or by direct fabrication. What's beyond hilarious, though, is that even though we've established that she's a notorious liar and grifter, her Wikipedia article heaps exceeding praise onto her, with only 2 throwaway lines about some of her claims maybe not being completely accurate. Michael Bassett, a DPRK analyst for the US military, has said that she wants to sensationalize the narrative to make everyone think that, this is the 90s North Korea. It's not. In reference to the crippling famine after the dissolution of the DPRK's largest trading partner, the USSR. The famine, also, a direct result of horrific American sanctions. He's further stated that he thinks she's being used to promote an agenda of sanctions against the country and economic liberalization by organizations such as Freedom Factory, a Seoul-based free market think tank where she is a member. To quote, "It sounds like she's being fed a narrative. It sounds like she's being told to perform." So in summary, other defectors and several specialists in the area all claim she is a liar. She plays this cute young girl character in front of human rights agencies. Meanwhile, on her libertarian podcast and interviews, she compares American universities to re-education centers and claims that respecting people's pronouns is an attempt to control how you think, just like in North Korea. In other places, she claims there's a plan for America to become communist, with the usual elites and Democrats taking away our freedoms nonsense. Make of that what you will. This is generally the same story with all celebrated defectors. Sensationalized, if not outright fabricated stories in order to sell books, get speaking commissions and money from libertarian think tanks, basically to grift. So, why do people defect? Well, unsurprisingly, the vast majority of those that defect, according to defectors themselves, do so on economic grounds. The countries they come from were already underdeveloped imperial periphery countries that had some sort of revolution, followed by US attempts at destabilization, diplomatic vilification, economic sanctioning, and sometimes even outright invasion and bombing. The DPRK, Cuba, Vietnam, even the USSR. Basically, countries exploited by imperial powers receiving the business end of the American boot, with the expressed intent of maximizing misery and preventing their development. With that context in mind, those countries are doing pretty decently for themselves. No capitalist country would be able to resist collapsing, let alone still provide a decent living standard. That's not even mentioning the horrible track record of tricking or sometimes even outright kidnapping of people, which is sadly very frequent in South Korea in regards to the so-called DPRK defectors. A good documentary that outlines this is Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang in Seoul. What does the media and US foreign policy get from these spectacles? The DPRK is incredibly strategically important in location, as well as very rich in minerals. Some estimates put the worth of natural resources of the DPRK at many trillions of dollars, not a cent of which goes into the pockets of American businessmen or politicians. Unsurprisingly, there's a lot of money in this business. An anti-DPRK organization can get a grant of up to $350,000 for engaging in so-called activism against the DPRK from the US government. If you start an organization to help, the homeless, you won't get a cent from Uncle Sam, but start agitating for the military destruction of another country and Lockheed Martin profits, and watch the money come rolling in. The media plays this game because of clicks and ads. Everyone loves a dramatic sob story, and ridiculous titles with obvious hyperbole get more attention and ad revenue than the benign reality. The US government, on the other hand, plays it for far more insidious reasons. Let me familiarize you with the Nayirah Testimony. On October 10, 1990, a haunting testimony by a 15-year-old girl named Nayirah was widely publicized and cited numerous times by American senators and the then-President George H.W. Bush as justification for the First Iraq War. The stories were the usual comically evil type. Iraqi soldiers were ripping kids out of incubators and throwing them onto the floor to die, etc., etc. She was teary-eyed, and American cameras loved it and spread the images and videos to over 700 different channels within the US. Congress directly backed her, claiming her information was credible, and this spectacle had played a great hand in fostering a pro-war public opinion amongst the American public. Just a side note, the advertising agency that was planning and executing all of this also did similar services for the Church of Scientology as well as anti-abortion groups. Anyways, 2 years later, it turned out that the whole thing was staged, and she was actually the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the US, and that the US knew all along, all to justify the illegal invasion and destruction of my country. An Iraqi defector, Al-Janabi, made big news by spreading the Iraq has WMDs nonsense in the late 90s, only to admit in 2011 that he completely lied, with the US government knowing all along that he was lying. Now, does that mean all defectors are paid actors spewing nonsense? Not necessarily, but it does mean people need to be really careful with so-called defector testimonies, unless you think what happened in Iraq was a good idea. Socialist defectors? This video has gone on for long enough, but I just want to mention this for those interested. There were many, in some places I've seen nearly the exact same amount, of high-level defections from the West to socialist countries. From between 1917 and before World War II, hundreds of thousands applied to immigrate, defect to the USSR from the US. Interestingly, many of them being women and African Americans. Concrete numbers are hard to find, but I've seen anywhere from 5,000 up to 70,000 African Americans emigrated to the USSR in this period. There's a lot more info in this realm, be it Cuba or Vietnam from nearby countries in differing periods, but that's never spoken about. Again, because it's an ideology game, where no one really wins. So, my conclusion, just think critically about all of this. If you're seeing something about a quote-unquote enemy nation being blasted to you, with the help of trusted representatives at Congress and whatever else, all in an attempt to make you think a specific way, just ask yourself why. Why do they want me to think like this? That's all.